He loves me like I was his only child.
Welcome to the Hope Children's Home, a residential nonprofit charity which has cared for thousands of abandoned, abused, and orphan kids in Tampa Bay for almost 45 years.
These children are here of no fault of their own. Just life experiences have made it to where they needed to be here and be cared for.
Executive Director Mike Higgins says everyone working at the facility, which has a full-time school and relies entirely on donations, looks at it as more than a job.
All of our staff live on property. They've all been called here. Nobody makes big salaries. They're here because they love children and want to make a difference in their life.
And while the kids' best interest is the focus for most working here, that wasn't the case for one man.
Mr. Deason?
Yes.
Al Schaefer.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, sir. Sorry it's under these conditions.
The conditions Tampa Fire Captain Al Schaefer is talking about are found in these 2011 IRS records showing he embezzled funds from the organization through his part-time job as business manager and bookkeeper.
So tell me, what kind of person embezzles money from orphans and abused kids?
I mean no disrespect, with all due respect, sir. I just have no comment on that.
But the records speak volumes, showing from 1999 through 2011, thousands and thousands of dollars from donors to help the children were transferred by Schaefer from the Hope account to his own, totaling more than $373,000.
I just needed to find out the truth.
Attorney Kirk Eichholz was appointed by Hillsborough Judge Paul Huey as temporary executive director during the investigation into what happened with the money. Eichholz, who is also a donor to the home, commissioned a forensic audit and determined Al Schaefer was the only one responsible.
As a donor, I was hugely offended by the fact that, several hundreds of thousands of dollars were taken by a man that really didn't need the monies.
We're caring for more children than ever, and the ministry's doing wonderful, but there's still this loss of money.
Money intended to help care for these kids that went into the bank account of Schaefer.
These are orphans and abused kids. I got to tell you, it offends me.
And I'm sorry you're offended at something, but I'm just not going to comment on it, sir.
Meantime, the board was concerned with bad publicity for the home at the time the embezzlement was discovered and tried to work with Schaefer to have him pay back the money. Schaefer has refused. Now a new board of ministers is overseeing the charity, and some are pushing to report the embezzlement to authorities before the statute of limitations runs out. Of course, we'll stay on top of this and also have an update from Tampa Fire Chief Tom Forward, who knew about the embezzlement. That's coming up in our next report. It's a place that takes care of abused kids and orphans and depends entirely on donations. But in 2011, Executive Director Mike Higgins realized the Hope Children's Home was in severe trouble.
Even though we were doing all that we could, we got to where I remember a time that we had just a couple of weeks of operating income in the bank. And that's a scary thing when you have 80, 90 children, you have staff depending on the monies to be here to pay the light bill, to take care of the needs that we have each year. We feed 300 meals a day.
The problem, this man, Tampa Fire Captain Al Schaefer, the former treasurer of the organization. According to these records, the charity's file with the IRS, Schaefer embezzled more than $373,000.
I mean no disrespect, with all due respect, sir. I just have no comment on that. So.
But do you deny you did it? You said to the board when you resigned that you did inappropriate things.
Again, Mr. Deason, with all due respect, and I do mean that, I just not going to be able to comment on that right now.
Schaefer's boss, Tampa Fire Chief Tom Forward, defends his fire captain and his decision to keep him on the job.
I deal with credible sources of credible information.
And that's why Forward says he ignored this anonymous letter accompanied by the IRS records implicating Schaefer. In fact, the chief promoted him after he received the packet.
Mike, I cannot run this agency's off of anonymous letters.
No, this is not anonymous letters. These are IRS records.
Attorney Kirk Eichholz, who was appointed to investigate the missing money, is disappointed Schaefer is on the job and disappointed by Schaefer's actions, considering the fire captain makes more than $90,000 a year and owns this waterfront home.
And that's what breaks the hearts of so many donors, is to think that he didn't need the money. You know, he did this purely by greed.
But the fire chief says he won't take any action unless he hears from a law enforcement agency.
Why have not I heard from one of those?
Well, they haven't filed charges yet. The organization was hoping they could work out a repayment plan. They're ministers. These are ministers who were hoping that he would repent and repay. He didn't do that.
However, Forward says if Schaefer is found guilty, he will take swift action.
If I get anything that has merit from any of those regulatory agencies that I got a problem here, you know this person is no longer suitable to wear the uniform of the City of Tampa's fire department.
And we've been told members of the board will ask authorities to take action immediately. Meantime, the executive director, Mike Higgins, does tell us the Hope Children's Home is financially stable now, thanks to continued community support.
These are orphans and abused kids. I got to tell you, it offends me.
And I'm sorry you're offended at something, but I'm just not going to comment on it, sir.
That was Tampa Fire Captain Al Schaefer, who was caught embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from a local orphanage, Hope Children's Home. Then Investigates first broke the story for you in May, and tonight, Mike Deason joins us with the breaking update. Mike, what have you got?
Well, Dion, Schaefer may not have had a comment in May, but this plea deal provides irrefutable proof that money donated to the Hope Children's Home for orphans ended up in his pocket.
From Hope Children's Home perspective, we're happy that this chapter in this book has been closed.
Kirk Eichholz was appointed interim CEO when the missing money was discovered. Eichholz's plea, Schaefer signed the plea deal admitting he doubled his salary as treasurer. He wrote checks from the Children's Home bank account to pay his personal credit cards, and he embezzled at least $187,000. IRS records show thousands more.
He faces the possibility of jail time. Do you think that's appropriate here?
Well, that's not for me to be the judge and jury on that one, but I do know that restitution is absolutely paramount.
And while Al Schaefer is still a member of the Tampa Fire Department, the chief promised that if this day ever came and there was 100% proof that he stole the money, he wouldn't be a member of the department for very long.
If I get anything that has merit from any of those regulatory agencies that I got a problem here, you know this person is no longer suitable to wear the uniform of the City of Tampa's fire department.
Meantime, Eichholz says the Hope Children's Home was forced to go to law enforcement only after Schaefer refused to make restitution.
That's what breaks a person's heart, is because if he just would have followed a reconciliation program of some sort, he wouldn't be in the mess that he's in now.
Now, Schaefer, who used 2 sets of books, could face up to 20 years in prison, a fine of $374,000, and I'm happy to tell you, right before we went to the air, Fire Chief Tom Ford lived up to his promise. He suspended Schaefer without pay.
Wow, you know, something that we should bring up is that when you actually talked to Schaefer, he seemed very matter of fact, very cut and dry. I mean, did he show any signs of remorse?
Well, not while I was talking to him and not while he was talking to the Children's Board. However, according to the plea deal, when the feds were talking to him, they say he broke down emotionally.
Quite a difference.
He's got a dark future ahead of him.
All right, quite an eye-opening investigation. Mike Deason, thank you.
A Tampa Fire captain who has been suspended is likely headed for federal prison following an appearance in U.S. federal court in Tampa. As you may recall, last spring we told you records uncovered by 10 Investigates found that Captain Al Schaefer had been embezzling money from orphans and abused kids who were living at Hope's Children's Home in Tampa. As 10 Investigates Mike Deason, who uncovered the scheme, explains, in court today, Schaefer admitted that he stole the money.
To use your words, in all due respect, I know you don't, Anthony, but I want to ask Al, Anthony.
No, we don't have any comment.
Yeah, but in all due respect, Al, to use your words, how could you steal from orphans?
While Al Schaefer wouldn't answer our question, in federal court he entered a guilty plea to mail fraud for embezzling $187,000 from these orphans at the Children's Home. IRS records say it's almost $200,000 more.
I feel sad, heavy-hearted that it has come to this point that, you know, Mr. Schaefer is now, you know, facing criminal charges.
Hope Children's Home Executive Director Mike Higgins was worried Schaefer, who started stealing money in 2007, would never be punished.
What broke the case, in all honesty, was your report earlier this spring of the alleged embezzlement of Al Schaefer.
And while it's not 100% clear what the federal guidelines call for in terms of punishment, when he's sentenced 90 days from now, it almost certainly will include prison time, which causes mixed feelings from the people at the Hope Children's Home. Do you think he ought to do jail time?
That's never been my concern for Al. My concern has been that we get the monies returned, and the fact that this has been 4 years ago, I'm just ready to kind of put this thing behind us.
Schaefer will also have to pay several $100,000 in fines and repay the money donors intended for the orphans and abused kids at the Children's Home. Mike Deason, 10 Investigates.
Finally fired by the chief. The Tampa firefighter who admitted to stealing money from orphans is out of a job tonight.
Al Schaefer, who could now face federal prison time following his guilty plea, tried to resign, but the city said, no way. 10 Investigates Mike Deason, who exposed this embezzlement from the Hope Children's Home, is live in the newsroom with the latest. And Mike, why wouldn't the city let him resign?
Well, Reg and Courtney, if Schaefer had resigned instead of being fired, he would have been able to get paid for half of his unused sick time. And that was substantial, would have brought him a $12,900 retirement check. But because he disgraced the department as well as himself, Chief Tom Forward would not accept his resignation. And did he give the department a black eye?
It absolutely will, Mike, without a doubt.
But despite that black eye, Al Schaefer, who stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from these orphans at the Hope Children's Home, will walk away with a $56,000 a year pension for the rest of his life. And taxpayers are picking up more than half of the tab.
His service to Tampa Fire, to this community, was absolutely impeccable, Mike.
Since Schaefer stole the money while he was off duty, he can't lose his pension. But Schaefer could have lost his job months ago because at the same time 10 Investigates uncovered IRS documents showing that he embezzled $373,000 from the Children's Home, the fire chief received the same documents.
The fire chief was aware of these allegations, had the IRS report, and he still promoted him. What's your take on that?
Disappointing. Very, very disappointing.
Kirk Eichholz, the interim CEO of the Children's Home during the time the missing money was discovered, is disappointed the chief didn't act sooner. But Forward says he handled it appropriately.
I don't go outside doing outside witch hunts or trying to disclose things that happens on other person's off-duty work.
But some at the Children's Home don't agree. They say the chief had the records and they think he should have acted sooner.
But those IRS records, those were federal records. You didn't feel like maybe in retrospect that you should have looked and...
Even in retrospect, and I think I commented to you then, I am not a tax attorney.
Now, while the chief didn't take action last spring, to be fair, he did keep his word and immediately suspended and then fired Schaefer as soon as possible, as soon as he was notified by the feds that Schaefer had signed a plea agreement. As we mentioned earlier this week, Schaefer has to make restitution to the Hope Children's Home. He faces several $1,000s in fines and scores out for prison time when he's sentenced early next year. Mike Deason, 10 Investigates.